Good morning.
Morning.
I want for us to take a look this morning at Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25. I don't know, I'm sure you recall at some point in the past, I started a long series that began in Matthew 21 and just kept going. And eventually I got to chapter 24 and I said, this is hard. And so I stopped and did a bunch of other lessons and then eventually came back and we have got a very mottled coverage of Matthew 24. Well, chapter 25, here we are. I'm not going to just resume that series, but I thought it would be good to have another entry and continue our progress. Someday we might reach the end of Matthew, at which point I guess we'll have to start the book over and just go until we get to chapter 21 and stop. Just do it, in a circle. But in Matthew chapter 25, I want you to remember that Jesus is teaching about preparation, about watching and waiting for the coming of the Lord. And that's really the punch of Matthew 24, where he goes into all of this detail about his, not only his eventual second coming, but the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the temple and everything that's going to involve. And he tells his disciples, you need to be on the lookout because judgment is coming. There's going to be an immediate judgment on the nation of Judah, and there's going to be an ultimate judgment on the world. And that's how he ends chapter 24 in verse 42. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. Who then is the faithful and prudent slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Well, after that, Jesus gives the parable of the 10 virgins, the 5 wise, and the 5 foolish. And he makes the same point, and then he gives the parable of the talents, where he makes basically the same point. But I want to take a look at the parable of the talents, which we all know, but I want to emphasize what I think has been the hardest lesson for me from this particular parable. So we're going to start Matthew chapter 25, verse 14, and go to verse 30. He says, for it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slaves and handed over his possessions to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, where a talent is an extremely large sum of money. I here prefer the New International Version, which has bags of gold. I think that gets the picture across better. 5 bags of gold. And another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and he went on his journey. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of these slaves came and settled accounts with them. And the one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed 5 talents over to me. See, I've gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful with a few things. I will put you in in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Also, the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you handed 2 talents over to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one also who had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid, and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. And his master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I do not sow, and gather where I scattered no seed. Therefore you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him, and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. And throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, and in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, I think we generally know that this parable is about using the opportunities that God has given to us. I always find it very amusing whenever I've heard this text taught. It usually goes something like this. It's read through, and then someone will take the time to explain that a talent is a unit of money. And it represented such and such quantity of modern money, and then make the whole point that in application, this unit of money represents our talents. Because, when he says talent here, of course he does not mean our talents in the way we use it. It just happens to have the same name. And I don't know if that's a wonderful coincidence or one that's less fortunate. But I find it amusing that it always seems that you go in this roundabout. But it doesn't, I think that's oversimplified. I want you to notice, first of all, that he provides no full explanation of this parable. Sometimes Jesus gives a parable, and then he proceeds to give an explanation. This is this, and this is that. And he explains what each item means. And we might assume, of course, that talent, because it sounds like talent represents a talent. And I would say that is included in this. But there are many kinds of opportunities that God can provide you with. And I want you to see that Jesus doesn't specify. He is not specifying only people who have been given great talent or skill in life. He does not say what these represent at all. And for each person, these may be very different. And I know it's very generic, but to say that these broadly represent the opportunities or the privileges that God has afforded us with, I think is probably as specific as we can get. Because he doesn't say, I want you to make the connection that in the next parable, he gives some examples actually of the kinds of opportunities you might be given. And none of those are things that require tremendous skill or money or abundance. In the next parable, he goes in verse 35. He talks about how he was hungry and you gave him something to drink. Thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. Naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. In prison, you came to me. Right? None of those things really require very much ability. Those are things everyone can do. And again, I think those things are included in what Jesus says here. I want for you to think about the man with the one talent, though, and ask why he does what he does. Because when I read this, he received the one talent, he went away, he dug a hole in the ground, he hid his master's money. Now, why would he do that? I mean, it isn't what the other two men do. Pretty obviously what they were supposed to do. What else would you do? You've been put into there. I mean, if you are in a conversation with your financial manager and you say, I've set aside this money, I want you to take care of it. Well, it's obvious you expect him to try to increase that money as much as he's able. And he's the one that's supposed to know how to do that, right? He's supposed to know what mutual funds and stocks and bonds and what things to purchase and invest in. That's his job. Your job is you're just giving him the money and he returns it to you. Now, this man hands over his property to these managers. And their job is to manage them. They know how to manage them. Why is it that this one man does the most ridiculous thing? And he basically puts it in we might say, in a shoebox under his bed. Now, why might someone do that? Why do people put money? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing this, but I want us to think about the parable. Why do people put their money in a shoebox under their bed? Because it feels like it's more secure there. Nothing's going to happen to it. You know exactly where it is. It's secure. And there's no risk. Now, I stopped trying to invest my own money because I used to try that. And you know what? That's very risky. I remember one time I got so excited. I had some friends who told me about options trading. I don't know if any of y'all are into finance. Told me about options trading. And I got so excited. I had no idea what I was doing. And it doesn't take a whole lot. And I remember with just a few $100s, I made over $1,000 in one day. And I got so excited. I didn't know you could do that. I just clicked a few buttons and boom, tenfold. And then I tried to do it again. And it was all gone. There's risk, right? There's risk involved in that. And you see what this man does. He takes he's supposed to be investing it, and instead he buries it. And his master asks him, why did you do this? And he explains, and that's actually basically what he says. He says, I knew you to be a hard man. I knew that when I came back to you, I was going to be responsible for my actions. And whatever happened, I knew you were going to hold me accountable, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you'd scattered no seed, and I was afraid. And so I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. I didn't lose it. I didn't lose it. It's still here. Isn't that what you want? And I think he's probably very surprised that in verse 26, his master calls him wicked and lazy. Now, if you give your money over to your financial manager and you find out he's just been letting it sit in an interest-free account for the past 10 years, I hope you're checking on your accounts more often than once every 10 years, but if you find out he has been letting it sit in an interest-free account for 10 years, and he's like, look, I didn't lose any of it, you would be very upset, and you would probably call him lazy too, because it's his job to figure out what to do with it. It's not your job to figure that out. It's his job. He's supposed to know. And I don't know exactly what these talents represent for every individual, because every individual is given something different. So you see with the 1 talent, the 2 talents, and the 5 talents, everyone receives something different, and in differing quantities. It isn't God's job to figure out what to do with that. That is a responsibility he gives to you. And the lesson that has been hard for me, and maybe it's been hard for you too, is because sometimes it feels prideful to acknowledge that God has given you whatever opportunities or privileges or skills or talents you may have. And we're afraid to put it to use. And so we try to just hold it under so it doesn't turn into pride. And I want you to see that whatever privileges and opportunities, skills, education, connections, whatever God has given you, he gave it to you because he wants you to do something with it. I don't know what it is. He wants you to figure that out. He wants you to look at your life, everyone you know, everything you've ever experienced, every blessing you have ever received, and find out how you can multiply it for the sake of the Lord. It isn't prideful to acknowledge that you've been blessed. In fact, that's the key. These men are not supposed to be multiplying their own money. Now, I'm sure most financial managers are probably very good at multiplying their own money. That's why they're financial managers. But their job is to take care of yours. And to remember that it's yours. The things God has given you, it only becomes pride if you forget that they are from God. I want you to see this as well. In verse 24, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you had scattered your seed. And I was afraid, and went away, hid your talent in the ground, see you have what is yours. But his master answered and said to him, you wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow, and I gather where I scattered no seed. Now, my investments have done very so-so. God's investments don't. If you put them to use, it will grow. If you use them to glorify God, they will grow. We're afraid of the risk. We're afraid of pride. Yet, God says if we know that He is the kind of God who can do great things from nothing, we shouldn't be surprised when that works out. And that should instead encourage us to put those things to use. Whatever that may be, however that looks. I worry sometimes about my preaching because I know I'm very vague a lot. And the thing is, every single one of you is different. And I do not know, legitimately, I do not know what this text means you need to do. I do not know. And I think this text reminds us that I don't need to know. The three men do not concern themselves with what the other two are doing. And that isn't their responsibility. Their responsibility is to focus on what they've been given. We might be inclined to give a little too much attention. Well, look at brother so-and-so. He's been so blessed financially, I don't know why he isn't putting better use of it. That isn't your problem. That isn't your decision. That isn't your task. Divert your attention instead to what you have been given, not what so-and-so sister is doing with her life and her home, or whatever it may be. You decide for yourself. By looking at what God has given you, what can I do? How can I make the most out of my life? Because the master is returning. And when he returns, he's going to settle accounts with each of his slaves. And he's going to ask you what you have done with all of those things. And if you don't have an answer, if your best answer is, I preserved them, Jesus has already told you how he feels about that. He gave those things to you because he expects you to do something with them. And the more privilege, the more opportunity has been given to you, the greater responsibility lies on your shoulders. And I think many of us in here, if not all of us in here, have been deeply blessed and privileged. Which means the Lord is going to require quite a bit of us. He wants to know what we're doing with it. Are we making the most of the time we've been given? Are we making the most of the relationships we have? Are we spending our money in a way that promotes the Lord and his values? Are we executing the skills that we have in ways that help other people and show the love of Christ? What are we doing? We only have so much time, and Jesus' point in this whole context is that we don't know how much time that is. But it ticks away ever so slowly. And you have a responsibility. God wants to know that you're doing something with it. Because when the master comes, to some he will say, As to the first two, verse 21, verse 23, he will say, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. But to some he will say, you wicked, lazy slave, you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away, and they will be thrown out into outer darkness,